We're now going to take a look at creating TreEcoSystems. Basically, populating trees with ecosystems in order to create realistic looking trees. The first thing we want to do is design a branch object. I've created one already, just to show you what one looks like. And this is a modified alder species, which is what we're going to be using. And instead of using lots of dense texture maps with lots of leaves, we're applying individual leaves to those leaf planes, and then populating an object with a very minimal amount of branches and painting them on, which works probably the best. So what I want to start out by doing is going and loading in a new species, and we're going to load in the alder late spring. So we're going to go and edit the object in the plan editor, and what we want to do is adjust our angle and droop options. We're going to go to the branches. Actually, we'll want to start maybe with the trunk. And what we're going to do is set up our droop. And these are going to be the primary branches of the tree. So however you want them to look, basically you want to modify it at this point. And we can adjust the fall off, so whether or not we want the leaves close together or farther apart. And then we're going to go over to the branch subset and adjust the angle. And then we can adjust the gnarl if you want to increase it. It really depends on, of course, the tree you're creating. One thing I want to do is go to the roots and decrease the length and the diameter to basically get rid of them for the most part. Although they are kind of there floating. Adjust the fall off a little bit. We can always replace that texture with just a 100% transparent texture if needed. What I want to do is replace the leaves with a single leaf. So of course you're going to need texture maps of single leaves. You can use the ones that come with view on the plant species. So taking any of the leaves from the plant species, if it's just a single leaf, will work. I'm going to be using a leaf from the Leaves collection from AZLFX. It's actually the first product that was released by AZLFX, although now at version 2. I'm going to go ahead and load in one of my leaves. And if you do have the Leaves collection, I'm using Palmate 48, color 3. My local versions do have embedded alpha maps. The released version of the Leaves collection at the moment does not have them embedded. Will be part of a future update. So what you can do, if you need to, is load in the separate alpha. There's a lot of groups with different color changes, so the amount of alphas is less than the amount of leaves. Just make sure the hooking point's on the stem, and that also gave us a little preview what the polygon's going to look like, so we do need to increase the length a bit. Depending on the direction we want them coming off of the branches, I think we may need to swap that around. So I'm going to edit the object, actually the leaf, and rotate around those maps and change the hooking point, because we want them coming off the branches correctly. And then I'm going to go ahead and edit the material and edit the function for the bump. And remove that setup there and load in the bump map. And connect that to the grayscale output. I'm going to set my interpolation type to bilinear, and then change bump output to 0.01, highlight, just reduce it a little bit. If you're using view 8 and lower, the equivalent bump is going to be 0.05. So we can rename this. Just going to call it palmate, and then copy and paste it onto the leaf 2. And we might need to reverse the direction of this one. So we'll go ahead and flip that over, adjust the hooking point, and that does seem to work a little bit better. So then we'll edit the map, because we do need to also flip over the bump. And then we can give this a new name, palmate, and just var, variation. Now, there's also a stem subset, which each of the leaves is connected to. Because we do have stems on the texture map, we don't necessarily need those other stems. Adjusting the stems will allow you to create a lot more variation by gnarling it and adjusting the angle in which the leaves are going to come off the tree. We can also droop the leaves a little bit more, adjust the fall off. And if we need to, we can adjust the width and the height. It looks like the length of leaf subset 2 needs to be increased. Go ahead and take a look at the preview of the leaf. We can see the scale. Let's go ahead and double check number 1. Looks like the length needs to be increased a little more. And then you can adjust the flexibility and curl. But this should be good. And if you want to modify bark textures to match another tree you're creating, or the main base tree, you can also set that up ahead of time or after creating the ecosystem. I am going to make one last change to the leaves, and I am going to reduce the curl amount per leaf subset. -100 for the curl for each set of leaves. And that looks like it should be pretty good. So what we can do is edit the object, and then we're going to go ahead and save the plant species. I'm going to call this branches, alder, and we're going to incorporate the texture maps. So now we're going to go ahead and use this to create our tree. I'm going to save the scene out first. And I'll just call it customizing vegetation _ branches. I'm going to go ahead and create a new scene. Actually, we can use this scene. That should be alright if we save a new version. I'm going to go ahead and double check my internal unit. I'm going to go ahead and apply a change of 1 meter and now load in our tree species. Go ahead and load in the dead tree. And this has a very minimal amount of branches, just to give us the basic structure of the plant. So we can customize this to get the tree that we want. And that should work out pretty well. Also, one good thing to do is increase the quality of the mesh. When you reset it and grow a new species or a new plant, it is going to remove that increase in detail. I'm going to adjust this a little bit more because those branches aren't quite looking the way I want them. Also keep in mind, if you're ever growing a tree and you see one that you like, but then because you're hitting the button maybe so many times you pass it up, you can use the undo to go back to a previous species or one that was just grown. So that is pretty nice. I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. So then I'm going to go back and increase the resolution. Okay, so now we're going to use this and set up, edit the material. There's only one material on here. We're going to add and switch over to an ecosystem and add in our plant, which I did save to my grass directory. Branches alder. And just to set up our scale, we're going to start with just a regular population, increase our density, and see what we need. Force regular alignment of instances. And set our scale to 0.01. And then we can display full quality near camera in order to get a better idea how it's going to look. So it may not cover the entire object with just a regular population. Typically, you'll have to increase the density in order to be able to fully fill the tree if you're populating it with the populate button. I think one of the better ways to create the tree is to paint in the instances. So what you could do is, as I've done, create a population, and then anywhere that needs filling, you can go ahead and select paint. And I'm just going to use the single instance and go in and fill in anywhere that needs more vegetation. So anywhere we want to add additional branches, just clicking and adding them in. Mostly it's going to be the tips of the branches that are going to give you the most trouble. And then you can also delete any that you don't like after populating. So I'm going to go to the eraser and just remove some of those bottom ones. And that should be good. So let's go ahead and just take a look at this tree. So overall, that doesn't look too bad. Might want to go in maybe with some smaller instance variations and fill in some other areas. for new growth. And of course, you can customize additional plants and variations in order to be able to get the kind of branch you're looking for. But the important thing is having a good match between the amount of detail on the main tree branches compared with the branch object or instance object. So if you had a more complex tree, you would need a less complex instance. Because otherwise things tend to get a little erratic. This I've found is probably one of the better ways. Another thing, if you're going to be animating the wind, is you want to make sure that you turn off the wind influence on the main trunk. Because what's going to happen is if that's moving around, it's not going to move the instances with it, so it'll move around and the branches will stay in their same location. But one nice thing is that these branches that have been added do respond to the wind, so you will be able to get some larger scale movement because we have a more complex instance and a less complex main trunk. So even though the whole tree in itself won't bend over, we will still get a lot of movement out of all the branches, or the ecosystem branches. Now, unfortunately, we can't save this species as something that could be populated within an ecosystem because ecosystem layers just don't apply within ecosystems. There's no second level. You can save it with the ecosystem layer unpopulated, and then populate some instances, convert them to objects, and then populate the materials. But of course it's not going to fill in everything perfectly because we did paint in a lot of it. So the best thing to do is really just create specific objects. I mean, these are really just for close-ups. You wouldn't need this much detail for a giant ecosystem, but within a certain range from the camera, they are incredibly useful at this higher res. So what you could do is just save out these individual objects. Another thing we can do is if I go ahead and copy and paste this tree, and this is basically what's going to happen if we were to create a bunch of objects with the dead tree, with the ecosystem added, and then converted it. I'm going to grow a new tree, and then we need to update the ecosystem. So if we need to, on this one, try to fill it in a little bit more. So this way we could still have those branch groups as a part of it, and be able to create a new tree and just populate it, or of course you can paint it in. Let's just take a look at a render. So that looks really nice. Now, if you want to avoid populating the bottom of the tree, you can turn on the decay near foreign objects and increase the influence, and then it's going to include the ground or whatever object the tree is on as part of the decay. So if you were to take this object, turn on decay near foreign objects, just populate it, and then we no longer have the instances towards the bottom. So there are different ways to customize what's going to be created if you're populating. Otherwise, what you can do is always just go in and paint and fill it in that way. So you could even create a bunch of base trees, zoom out, switch over to the brush mode, and then fill them in. And that works out pretty well too. Provided that the density isn't turned up too high. In that case, you might want to set up an ecosystem rule for maybe slope. And this is a rendered version of the two trees with radiosity turned on. and you can see that it looks really nice. So using this with radiosity, fantastic. Of course, if you have a huge scene full of a lot of these trees, radiosity is always going to take a lot longer to render. In this case, this one took about 7 minutes to render, and it's just the 2 trees. So just one thing to keep in mind. For stills, though, it's definitely worth it. Animation, it probably wouldn't work very well, unless you optimize the lighting settings. Typically, you bake radiosity, though. And that would be an awful lot of work for this kind of a setup. But you can still get a pretty nice look, even by reducing the quality boost, which will definitely speed up the render a lot.